There are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sense of Beer Style podcast. Welcome back, Julia.
Hello, and welcome back to you and to all of our listeners and viewers.
Yes. If you are watching this show long in the future, then this is all old news. But while we're recording this show, both Julia and I just got back from traveling the world to do some thorough research on beer so we can bring it back to you. And this one, I volunteered to take this one. This one, as you already know, is the London Brown Ale from the historical category. And why is it historical? Because it's not easily found anymore. It is commercially extinct. It is hard to find. And in my recent trip to London, I asked some people ahead of time on the socials, if you've got 3 days, where should you go? And I've got a great list. Some of them I was able to make it to. Others, I visited what I could. But through the travels, through the discussions, through talking to people there and through the socials, I could not find a London Brown Ale in London. And to me, that speaks volumes that this beer style is on the brink of extinction. And I really hope that all of you listening, all of you watching, all of you that love to drink beer and to study beer will reach out to your home brewing friends, your homebrew clubs, your commercial brewers all around the world. And let's bring London Brown Ale back, because this is a beautiful, wonderful beer. And I'm sad that I couldn't find it in its own hometown. That says a lot. I mean, what do you think? What do you think of that experience, Julia? You go to London, you can't find a London Brown.
Well, it's relevant enough still for us to do the show on it, and it's relevant enough for Beer Judge Certification Program 2021 guidelines. They could have not carried it over from 2015. I mean, I'm used to seeing in the 2015 guidelines, if I'm correct, Northern and Southern English Brown. This is a different kind of brown ale. This London Brown Ale is a kind of recreation. That's the whole point of these historic styles, is that the style guidelines describe the recreation version. And you do hear about Mann's. That's the main producer who really made it popular and famous. And even the guidelines, Jeremy, on your question say, quote unquote, under comments, a vanishingly small segment. Sorry, I didn't mean to say sweet till the next sentence, which is, the gist is it's a very sessionable beer, very malty beer, and it's going to have some sugary, sweet flavor. So small group of people are, I think, supporting that. And, it's not like I've got the sales data, but you just recently coming back from the country of origin and deliberately seeking it and not being able to get it is a bit of a red flag, although relevant enough for us to still be discussing it today.
But if I had a quid for every time someone said, I don't like hoppy beer, I would have had a much more lavish and luxurious trip to London. So the fact that this is a very extremely malt forward beer just says, there's a segment out there that would love this. So I challenge everyone listening and watching. Let's see if we can bring this back. But without further ado, let's talk about what is this beer that Jeremy would love to see come back into the fold.
Sure.
Yeah, take it. Let's talk about the ingredients and whatever else you have on your mind.
Sure. And I mean, let's talk about ingredients, because that will entice us all to want to brew them, right? We don't have to find them commercially. We can just brew our own. And I will put myself to the test for that in the near future. So, I mean, there's nothing not to like about English pale malt, right? Very straightforward, easily convertible from starches to sugars, so they ferment well with ale yeast. So English pale malt's the base for these, London brown ales, and it's got then some adjuncts or some additions, often with darker caramel malts that will definitely lend to color, a little bit more body, because those aren't usually fermentable. It depends what you're using, and some flavor. You can have black malt in there to even really get it darker, and then wheat malt, right? I mean, the grain bill or grist for Mann's, the main producer, will definitely lean on using wheat, which also lends body and some sugars. So you've kind of got some sneak potentially of dark physical sugars for color and flavor. You've also got then the addition of lactose even to kind of bump up that residual sugar. When we get to vital stats, it's not alarming the final gravity, but for such a sessionable ABV that beer that's lower in alcohol by volume, it does have residual sugar that's going to be noticed as you drink it. And then the hops, again, back to nothing to not like about English pale malt. I love it. Nothing to not like about English hops, right? I just love English hops. If
I
you think
love
about
English hops.
German hops, American hops, English hops, New Zealand hops, French hops, all over the world, you start to get these flavor profiles. And the English hops are not going to be predominant in this malt-centric beer, but they bring something to the table. And we'll talk about that in flavor and aroma. And then also, too, ale yeast, as I did mention, as well in London, the country of origin for the style. It's known for moderate to high carbonate water, right? The mineral content from this beer is a higher carbonate water. Think when you're in the shower and it's not slick and the soap kind of stays on your skin, right? It's harder water. Think going to the mountains and renting a cabin and, the water's harder here because I can see the minerals on the faucet, right? The hardness is lended by that carbonate water from the London, UK area. The last thing for ingredients that's important to pay attention to is that back sweetening. So it's not just the lactose that I mentioned or potential dark sugars, but they often will add that post fermentation. So that bumps up the sugar even more, where there's no chance for the yeast to then develop from those sugars further alcohol and dry out the beer. It's going to be additional residual sugar on top of the final gravity that the brewer already had delivered.
Yeah. And if I can just tag on, let's just talk about that carbonate a little bit more. I mean, because hardness is not created equal. I mean, if you go north to the central England, you've got the Burton-on-Trent, you've got these high sulfates that really bring the hops out. This carbonate is really going to bring that malt into clearer focus. It's going to put that emphasis, chemically, is going to put that emphasis on the malt. And it's just a really, really beautiful thing. We see that in other cultures, in other beer cultures like Munich, for example, too. You see more carbonate that just brings this malty character out. When we get to finally find one of these beers and we pour it in a glass, what I'm looking for, what I expect to see according to the BJCP guidelines, is it is a London brown. So therefore, I'm looking for a moderately brown to near black. We'll talk about the numbers in just a minute, but it is a brown to dark brown beer. And it might be clear, and if you have like a little vial or a beaker or something like that, you might be able to see how clear the beer is. But because it's so dark, we may just call it opaque, and it really takes a little bit of effort to really assess the clarity. So don't hang your hat on that. Don't spend too much time trying to see how clear is my brown to black beer, just because it is going to be dark. But the head that will form if you pour it well, you get this light to moderate off-white tan head that can persist for a while, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. But that's the appearance. I'm more interested in the aroma. Tell us about the aroma, Julia.
Yes. So aroma is going to elicit the notion of sweetness. I always kind of have a bone to pick with the style guidelines. You've heard me if you listen to our show. You can't smell sweet, right? You can't
Nope.
smell sour. But there are volatiles that are perceptible by your ortho and retronasal passages that give you a sense that something might be sweet. So moderately malty sweet indication in the aroma is a good way to put it. And then caramel and toffee are two of the descriptors that commonly come up because of that English pale malt and the deliverables of that darker malt or even black malt. So caramel and toffee, what's not to like? I think that's my theme of the show, right? And so we love those flavors and we're getting a sense of those in the aroma. And then the esters are going to be low to medium. That's kind of indicative of many English ales. English ale yeast is got a nuanced, poetic way with these fruity esters. When I say fruity esters, I mean kind of like ripe fruit. It's not white fruit, not peaches and apricots, but kind of more to strawberries. Maybe the strawberries seem a little over ripened. They're not unripe. That would be a different type of flavor profile, or black raspberries, but very, very subtle, hard to find, right? But you might get those fruity esters. Dark plums is what's also brought up in the style guidelines. So really nice dark fruit. And then the hops will showcase some aroma. So it's low earthy English hops, or those floral English hops is optional, but I'd love to see that in any London brown ale that I had.
Yeah, when we translate that to flavor, when we finally taste it, I would start with the malt. And the beautiful thing about British malts, generally speaking, is they get very like biscuity, and especially with the way that the British yeast can manifest, sometimes it can give you this impression of like buttered biscuit as just like that base note. And then on top of that, we add layers of like this deep dark caramel or toffee, maybe a little bit of treacle, maybe a touch of coffee, because we are adding some darker grains to this. So you can have just a touch of roasty, bitter black malt, and that is okay. That should not be the forefront. That should not linger through the entire tasting experience, and it should not take you out of that beer experience, but it should add some complexity to this as well. It should not be sweet for sweet's sake. When we get into some of those esters that you were just talking about, Julia, this is where I'm thinking like dark fruits, and having some of the beers in England, you get this beautiful note of plums or dried plums, aka prunes. And I know there's a few of you that are turning your nose up at the idea of tasting prunes, because we don't all love prunes. But think about that for a minute. It really is a very distinct, very interesting, very complex flavor. And sometimes we can taste that in our tea. Sometimes we can taste that in our beer. And it really does add a dimension. As long as it's not the dominant flavor note, it really is kind of interesting. When we get into the bitterness, it should be kind of a low bitterness. Remember, this is a very malt, sweet forward beer, but isn't runaway in sweetness. It isn't cloying. So there should be a light bitterness to help soften that sweetness. There should be that roastiness that helps kind of balance that out. But as far as the hop flavor, if there's any hop flavor at all, it should be low. But we're looking for those British hops that Julie and I love. We're talking Riverstone, wet soil, green leaves, brown leaves, green tea, black tea, and if you're lucky, orange marmalade. These are all flavors I get out of these British hops, and they are just absolutely lovely. The fermentation, I just mentioned this. If you have that British yeast, they can, on occasion, kick out just a tiny little bit of diacetyl, not in a bad way, but it does give this like buttered kind of a fuller bodied impression than it really, really is. And so when it comes to that fermentation flavor, it should be clean, but it's not going to be perfectly clean. It's not like a German lager. So keep that in mind where we go with this. The finish should be sweet. It should be smooth. It should be enjoyable. But with that, let's talk about the mouthfeel.
And the mouthfeel is not too surprising, but it should be reassuring that such a sessionable beer, often less than 5% alcohol, is really only medium body. That's hard to do. It should be lighter body often, but so it's got some medium body because of that residual sweetness and the back sweetening that we've kind of talked about. And then medium low to medium carbonation. All of these are bottled. The style guidelines emphasize that. It's really hard to find these on cask or keg, and I'm just speaking based on the style guidelines. Please always correct Jeremy and I if you're from the country of origin or have experience with any of the styles or brands. But if you're going to find this in the bottle, unless it's nitrogenated, you want your bottled beer to have some carbonation. So medium low to medium makes sense for a bottled version of these beers. So they're basically mouthfeel like creamy in texture, a little bit smooth, as Jeremy's talking about. And I think surprisingly has some weight because it's so sessionable. That's a good thing to find.
So now let's talk about this beer and how it compares to other beers. If we were to compare this to an American brown, well, it's not going to have anywhere near the hop content. It's not going to have the high alcohol content, and it's going to be just more so that British ingredient flavor of malt and hops if we taste it at all. if we compare that to, because of its kind of sweetness and its malt forwardness, we could put it in terms of like a sweet stout. However we sweeten that stout is a different conversation, but let's just take a sweet stout, for example. It is going to be lower in alcohol. It's going to be less roasty, but it is going to have some flavor components that kind of overlap there. And then when we compare this to even like the British dark mild, which is a lower gravity beer, just like this London Brown, we'll talk about that in a minute. That London Brown is going to be sweeter. Dark mild is going to be a little bit more. It's going to be malt forward, but it's going to be more balanced. That London Brown is going to be more to the sweet malt flavor profile. So you can kind of put those in relation to each other, but kind of organize them in your mind where they need to be. But that's kind of how this breaks out. But you already mentioned this before, but let's just repeat this again, Julia. What are the commercial examples? If we could find one, what would it be?
Yeah, so Mann's Brown Ale comes up again and again. There's kind of a pre-World War II and a post-World War II difference in the alcohol levels from those examples. And then Harvey's Bloomsbury Brown Ale is the other example that the style guidelines, which I know has people advising and in the know. So they're literally only listing two, which I don't even know if any of our style guidelines, it's good trivia to look that's so rare, only two examples. And then I'll put on there commercial examples, mean sold, but if you were to put other examples, homebrew examples do come up in judging competitions. I do come across this occasionally as homebrewers are brewing these.
Yeah, but I will, just a quick PSA, just because it says London Brown on the can or the bottle, whether it's home brewed or commercially brewed, doesn't mean it's a legit example. And it may just be a nod, but this is where, if you find one of those, taste it and listen to this episode again and see how well it stacks up to what this classic version ought to be, and then you decide if it's a good example or not. That's kind of the fun part. That way you'll always have me and Julia there hanging out and having a beer with you if you listen to us. When it comes to the numbers, let's talk about the numbers. The alcohol by volume. This is a very sessionable beer. This is under 4%. So the numbers wise, it breaks out to 2.8 to 3.6 ABV. This is one of those beers where you could have a few and still be productive and still, I would never advocate drinking and driving, but if you have a few of these, there's a good chance that you could find your way home and still be a responsible-ish adult. When we get into the IBUs, again, IBUs or the hops are not prominent in the style. So IBUs reflect that at 15 to 20. This is negligible. This is just enough to keep that sweetness from being out of balance. When we get into color, we mentioned it should be brown to almost black. So that puts us at 22 to 35 SRM. Or if you're with the European Brewery Convention or EBC, we're at 44 to 70 thereabouts. When we get into the gravity, the original gravity, again, this is very sessionable and it does relate to the ABV. The specific gravity, original gravity, is 1033 to 1038. And if you're a Plato person, that puts us at a original Plato of 8 to 9. When we get to our final gravity or our terminal gravity, we're looking at 1012 to 1015. Now, look at those numbers. This is not a dry beer. This still has residual sugar. This still has body. This still has mouthfeel. And that final gravity reflects that. If you're a Plato person, we're looking at 3 to 4 in that range as far as that final Plato goes as well. So keep those numbers in mind and just note how different it is from all the rest of the British beers. And one of the things I did when I had to study this stuff is I thought about that ABV and which beers line up. I mean, we're talking like the light beers, the Scottish lights. These are a rare group that is under 4% consistently. So take a look at those and see how it all stacks up, and that'll help you keep all this information in your mind. That being said, let's talk about glass and temp.
And we should. And if you catch the Mann's that's being brewed today, the commercial example actually by Marston Brewing, 2.8% is what the ABV is listed. So on Vitals, it really does go pretty low. And that's pretty amazing. And so your typical, I think, English pub mug, right? I love a good dimpled mug. Mm-hmm. I just love that type of glassware. I actually love holding glass with the handles on the side. So I'm going with dimpled pub mug. And yet there's no wrong answer here. I mean, we definitely don't think your experience out of the bottle or can is good. And I mean, Jeremy and I are readily able to say that the American pint shaker glass was just made to really shake cocktails and somehow stuck because it doesn't break as much. But give yourself a treat. Try to find a dimple pug mug or some form of glassware that you just love to hold. This beer could warm up because it's so malty. So I'm not scared to say that in temperature that I want this more cask conditioned beers. This beer could be blended with bitters commonly. It is, so it darkens up a bitter. So if you ever were to have an English bitter, any ordinary bitter, extra special bitter, etc., try blending. Blending's really fun. And sometimes if a bitter's drier, this would maybe bring some residual sweetness to the table. So I'm going with cask conditioned and dimpled pub mug. For cask conditioned temperatures and dimpled pub mug.
Yeah, excellent. I would agree with you 100%. Now, when it comes to what we'd pair this with, this is the kind of beer. If I'm walking on a cold, overcast, rainy day, I'm wearing my pea coat, and I stop into a pub with my copy of some Jonathan Swift book, this might be the perfect beer for that, because I need something sweet to kind of to brighten up my my perceptions. But because of this beer has that body, has that impact of flavor, not necessarily alcohol, but impact of flavor, I'd love to try this with something spicy, like spicy savory meat, like a good barbecue rub or grilled veggies. I'd love to try this with a semi-spicy Indian. I'm not a big fan of spicy, not because I'm afraid of it, but it just messes with my palate. So I tend not to go to spicy. But with this, I would go into a little bit spicier Indian curry, maybe a big bowl of chili or some like spicy Chinese beef dish. I think this beer would be just absolutely lovely with those.
I like it. I'm thinking kind of pie, shepherd's pie, cottage pie, chicken pot pie, depending on what country you're in.
Any meat pie.
It's true. And those English pale malts really are going to just bridge to the pie notes. You could go to dessert. I mean, I just had some apple pie last night. I think it would actually go very nice with apple pie with vanilla ice cream on top, right? Absolutely. That lactose milk sugar would kind of bridge into it. So I'm having pie, some kind of protein savory pie for the entree with this. And then I'm having apple pie for dessert with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the way we can end this podcast is this is a hard to find beer, even amongst hard to find beers. So my friends, if you're listening, if you're watching, let's see what we can do to bring this back. And if you know of any good places to find a good example of a London Brown, please let us know and let's share it with everyone else out there. I think this would be a great way to form this community of sobs and hook each other up with a good London Brown. Agreed?
I love it. Cheers to you all and well wrapped up, Jeremy. Thanks for listening and watching, everybody.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia.
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.